You've seen it, right? All over the internet. Hateful comments, angry posts. But when do those words cross a line? When does an online rant become a real-world threat? Today, we're digging into that dangerous, blurry border between digital hate and physical violence.
So let's dive right in with a story that really hits this home. This is what political commentator Rochelle Ritchie asked after she reported a threatening tweet. The tweet said something like, "Kiss your loved ones when you leave home." And you know what Twitter told her at first? They said it wasn't abusive. Let that sink in.
Well, the answer to her question? It came just a few weeks later, and it was absolutely chilling. The man behind that tweet, he was arrested. Why? For allegedly mailing bombs, actual bombs, to prominent figures all across the country. And it turns out he'd been threatening other people on Twitter too.
All right, so this story, it just perfectly sets up what we're talking about first. A tweet, a threat. How something dismissed by a platform can be a warning sign for real danger.
Now you might be wondering, why wasn't this stopped sooner? Well, that's where things get really complicated, legally speaking. Here in the US, the bar for the government to step in is, well, it's incredibly high. Believe it or not, the Supreme Court has said again and again that most hate speech is actually protected as free speech under the First Amendment. And that right there, that's the heart of the whole issue. This incredibly blurry line between speech and violence. If the words are protected, but the actions aren't, where's the boundary?
So, this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The one that companies like Facebook and Twitter and even the FBI are grappling with every single day. At what exact moment does a nasty post online stop being just words and become a credible, punishable threat?
This chart really breaks it down perfectly. See, there's a huge difference between who's allowed to do the censoring. The First Amendment ties the government's hands. They can't just delete things they don't like. But private companies? Think of them like the owners of a mall. They make the rules. They're only bound by their own terms of service, which means they can basically take down whatever they want.
So, since these companies have all this power, it's kicked off this massive debate. And it really all comes down to two totally different ways of thinking about how to handle this problem.
You can pretty much boil the whole argument down to these two camps. First, you've got confront the hate. Their whole idea is that you have to drag these bad ideas out into the open and defeat them with better ideas. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. But then you have the contain the hate crew. They say no way. The best thing to do is cut these ideas off at the source, starve the fire of oxygen before it can spread.
Let's look at the confront side first. This is Jonathan Rauch. Now, his argument is really fascinating. As a Jewish man who has also been a longtime activist for gay rights, he says, and this might sound strange at first, that protecting all speech, even the really vile stuff, is what ultimately allowed civil rights movements to challenge the status quo and win.
And he's got this powerful analogy for it. He says that banning hate speech is like trying to solve global warming by just breaking all the thermometers, right? The problem doesn't go away, you just can't see it anymore. You're hiding the disease instead of actually trying to cure it.
Okay, so that's one side. Now for the other, the contain philosophy. This is Heidi Bereich. Her take is much more pragmatic. She basically says, look, I'd rather have these extremists talking to each other in some dark corner of the internet than have them out on mainstream platforms where they can recruit new followers. It's all about stopping the spread.
And for her Exhibit A, she points to something truly devastating, what happened in Myanmar. The military literally used Facebook to stir up hatred and incite a genocide against the Rohingya people. We're talking about mass murder and rape. The UN even said Facebook played a role, and the company itself later admitted they were way too slow to stop it. It is the absolute worst-case scenario. So you have these two really powerful, really compelling arguments on both sides. But what happens when you're a platform caught right in the middle of it all? Let's look at another case from right here in the US. Remember the horrific shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue? It was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in US history. Well, it turns out the man accused of the shooting had been posting all this vile anti-Semitic stuff on a social media site called Gab. The posts were just dripping with hate. But here's the question. Were they a direct, actionable threat?
And this is the exact agonizing question we're talking about. Imagine you're a content moderator. You're scrolling through thousands of posts a day. You see this rant. How do you make that call? Is this just someone venting horrible ideas, or is this the prelude to violence? Where is that line?
Well, the day after the shooting, the CEO of that site, Gab, basically threw that question right back at a reporter. He said, I don't know, do you see a direct threat in there? Because I don't. And that really gets at how murky and subjective this all is.
How can you really know someone's intent just from their words on a screen?
This whole challenge, being caught between protecting speech and protecting people, it leaves us with the final big question. So what do we do? What's the path forward?
Well, the companies are definitely feeling the heat. They can't just sit on the sidelines anymore. And they are starting to do things. Facebook, for example, is building something that's basically its own Supreme Court, an independent board that will have the final say on the toughest content decisions.
And this is really the key thing to remember here. The First Amendment, the bedrock of free speech law in America, it stops the government. It doesn't stop Facebook. So these huge society-shaping decisions about what we're all allowed to say online, they're not being made by judges. They're being made in corporate boardrooms in Silicon Valley.
Which leaves us, and you, with one last really big question to chew on. These private companies now have a power to shape what billions of people see and say, a power the U.S. government just doesn't have. So the question is, are we truly better off with them being the ones who draw that line,